Good afternoon. My name is Jean-Francois Bilodeau. I'm a senior instructor at Web-Based Solution, and I'll be the presenter for today's session, Managing Microsoft Azure Pain Point. A couple of quick things before we get started with the session. Well, first of all, welcome. Taking the time. Thank you for taking the time to join us during your lunch hour. I recognize we're all busy, and I'll try not to exceed my time for today. When it comes to the session, if you guys have any questions as we carry along, please leave them in the chat window or in the Q&A window. I may not answer them as we go through the session, but I'll make sure to answer them as we get to the end of the session. So the goal of this session over here is to discuss challenges, pain points that we often encounter as we move towards the cloud. And in this case, I want to talk particularly about managing Microsoft Azure pain point. Any cloud transition is going to have challenges, is going to have pain points. So this is not unique to Azure. The same would apply to AWS, to GCP, to any other cloud vendors out there. Some of those pain points, and especially their solution, will be specific to one cloud vendor or another. But what I'd like to do over here is explore three primary areas of pain points that we might encounter. Starting with technology management, we are changing our technology infrastructure, so that is going to lead to disruption in our organization. Let's also talk about cost management. I do get a lot of questions related to managing costs in the cloud. The ideal over here is after a successful transition to the cloud, our operation costs, development and operation costs, should be the same, if not lower than what we have right now. So that's going to be an objective for what we're going to discuss today. And finally, let's talk staff management, team management as well. So I am addressing managers in this session. If you're not a manager yourself, you'll still take plenty out this session to help you prepare and ideally deal with some of the broad challenges we encounter when it comes to migrating towards the cloud, adopting the cloud. So the three pain point will be technology, cost, and staff. Let's begin with the first one over here, technology pain point. After having assisted organization migrate to the cloud, I've had a chance to see a lot of very successful migration, and I've had a chance to see, unfortunately, less than stellar migration to the cloud. And one of the biggest challenge, and self-imposed challenge really, that I've seen over here when it comes to an organization migrating to the cloud might be in a way due to a lack of education, a lack of understanding as to what the cloud is about, and starting with the assumption that cloud is simply grabbing our data center and copying it offsite. That's not what cloud migration is about. This is not cloud adoption. This is simply offsite hosting. You're not going to gain if you're just deciding, hey, let's get rid of our servers on site, let's take our virtual machine and let's move them to Azure. I mean, yes, at this point you are using the cloud infrastructure, but I would not say you are cloud enabled. I wouldn't say you're taking advantage of the cloud. And I'll come back to that one as we carry along, but also another challenge that's important for us over here is migrating to the cloud is indeed a migration. It's not business as usual. We are transforming our business to take advantage of newer technology and technologies that would be fundamentally unthinkable to consider using on site. An example of that is things like cognitive services, artificial intelligence. That takes a lot of infrastructure, a lot of compute power to get into AI. And this is often something that we might not even consider doing on-prem due to the challenges of developing and maintaining that AI infrastructure. With the cloud, it's almost par for the course today. And that also implies that if you want to move to the cloud, you need to re-architect. All right. If you decide, again, let's just carbon copy our data center and move it to the cloud, I'll be honest with you again, this is not a situation which will benefit you long term. It will certainly not enable you to move to cloud computing. We'll talk about that as we carry along. But I'd like to get us started with the concept of cloud maturity level, starting with maturity level 0, going down to maturity level 5. Now, this is something we could spend a lot more time on, but I just want you to be fundamentally aware, superficially aware of what this is about. Also give you a sense as to where are we in our own cloud migration at work within our organization. So starting with CMM 0, Cloud Maturity Module 0, Maturity Module 0, this implies that we're still on-prem, working with legacy application, i.e. applications that are not cloud enabled. All right, doesn't mean that your legacy application are bad. I know legacy is a bad word, but it simply means in this context, it is not a cloud-based application. So our legacy application are running on dedicated infrastructure. So now we're going to move to CMM 1, the Maturity Module 1, where we're going to move towards more of an ad hoc management strategy for the cloud. We're going to analyze our current environment and cloud readiness. So where are we standing in terms of cloud readiness? A lot of this at this point will be and pretty much needs to be experimental, all right, in the sense that we are moving to a vast unknown. Every organization, every project, every IT shop is different. Thus, there's not one recipe that will work universally for every organization. There are certainly best practices and approaches that are universally recognized and generally work across a wide set of scenarios. But at this point, you need to experiment. Try things out. Don't be afraid to move out of your comfort zone. Try things that are new to the organization. As we mature, we want to move away from ad hoc type of management, ad hoc type of development operation, and move towards more manageable, repeatable automation. So we're at this point, we're getting a sense as to what works, what doesn't work for us as an organization when it comes to migrating for the cloud. We've got processes that we're putting in place for cloud adoption strategy. We're starting to define those processes as a manager and getting a better sense over here as to what needs to happen at the technology level, at the staff level, even cultural level, what needs to happen to move us to the cloud. So we're getting a sense of that. CMM 3, now we're getting more systematic. All right, we figured out how to make things repeatable. Now it's integrated in our system. We've got the tool, we've got the integration for automatic cloud usage. Because we're talking about Azure over here, one of the things I would recommend that yourself and your team familiarize themselves with the Azure Resource Manager, the ARM model that we have in Azure, which deals with repeatable, automatable infrastructure as code service in Azure. Very important, a very important capability of Azure I would recommend we take a look at. So at this point, again, CMM 3, we're getting systematic. So our processes are maturing. But now it's important to move to CMM 4. This one we want to strive for as early as possible. I find that a lot of organization, for better for worse, and I'm going to say generally for worse, get stuck at CMM 3. They think that, okay, we can automate deployments now. We're cloud enabled. And to many degrees, you could say that you are. However, we're not optimized for the cloud. Or more importantly, when it comes to making decision, technology decision, architectural decision, process decision, we don't have a solid foundation under which we can make those decisions. And this is where I want to get to a point where things are measured and measurable. So getting into an idea as to not just what we are doing, but how well are we doing those things. We're also getting into manual federation over here. What we mean by federation is getting, in this case, 2 or more clouds and our infrastructure to talk to one another as necessary. And what we want to strive for over here is, of course, CMM 5, where we want to optimize our processes. Now that we can measure them, and they are measurable, we know what we need to measure, we know how we can measure them, now we can start to optimize our operation, determine empirically what works, what doesn't work. When we have to make a change or when we choose to make a change, we can then turn around and decide, has that change been beneficial? How has it been beneficial? And if it has not been beneficial, what can we do to continue to optimize our processes? So in a nutshell, this is our cloud maturity module. Again, I wish I could spend more time on this, but I do want to respect the hour that you have for your lunch. So continuing with the idea of cloud maturity, there's three flavors of cloud services: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is probably the foundation that your team is most familiar with, where we run things in virtual machines. All right, this is, we're not limiting IaaS, infrastructure as a service, to virtual machine, but this is a place where most teams are comfortable with. Most operations running on-premise are comfortable with. However, the thing to recognize over here is that when it comes to IaaS, when it comes to risk and cost, we take on the majority of our risk and cost. And one of the goals of that transition moving to the cloud is we actually want to transfer the risk and especially the risk and the cost to the cloud vendor. All right, that's what we want to do. And favoring IaaS is not going to get you there. You'll want to start looking at PaaS solutions. So as you mature your processes, as the team develops a better understanding as to what is available in Microsoft Azure, then we'll want to move to PaaS, platform as a service. What is platform as a service? Without getting too sophisticated, simply it's an environment in which you run your code. You don't worry about managing the environment. It is managed for you by the vendor. All you need to do is throw your code on it. So at this point, you've got a good midpoint between you taking on some risk and cost, managing your code, and the vendor taking on risk and cost, managing the infrastructure. Everything that we need in that infrastructure, things like load balancing, intrusion detection and prevention, things like logging and monitoring of your services. Typically, the vendor can manage most of that for us. And ideally, we'll want to also strongly consider SaaS, software as a service, where at this point, the idea is instead of us installing and operating a piece of software on our infrastructure, we rely on a vendor to manage that infrastructure. All that they do at this point is they offer us the ability to consume that service. And we've got some examples over here, Office 365 being a prime example, SharePoint Online, Azure DevOps being another example. So there are many examples of SaaS out there, software as a service we could consider using to host our solution. So as we mature, I would say that what we should favor first is a SaaS solution. Does a SaaS solution suit our operational need or organizational need? If yes, hey, great. If no, let's look at PaaS. Do we have PaaS solution? If we have our own code that we need to run, is a PaaS solution adequate for our need? And I would suspect that, I'm just going to say arbitrarily, 80–90% of your custom code will be able to run in a PaaS, especially as you optimize for the cloud, you mature for the cloud. You will want to write application that takes advantage of PaaS. And then as a last resort, then we're going to consider IaaS. So moving ahead, a couple of pain points that deals with cost. And I get a lot of questions on this. How do I manage cost when I move to the cloud? Well, nothing I'll get out the way right now. You want to take advantage of the cloud. It will require some changes in how we manage our costs. And some of those changes may be very difficult to achieve. And we'll talk about those as we carry along. But in a nutshell, we're going to talk about the necessity of moving from project to program. And this is a part that I know it's hard, especially in nonprofit, especially in government organization where we're so project driven. Our budget is there to support a project. not a program or a process. Thus, the challenge over here is we need to change the organization to support program or again process-based cost management, where we want to invest in the development and maintenance of a system as opposed to a project to develop features and capability organized around a system where we have strict deadline, we have strict set of requirements. We'll need to change the way we manage those. All right, we'll talk about techniques to do that. We'll also need, now, I shouldn't say you absolutely need, but quite frankly, start moving towards DevOps. Start being agile, adopting agile methodology. This is important over here. All right? The waterfall is unfortunately dangerous. I know that the waterfall might look like a very sensible way of developing software. Reality, and this has been known. I can even go back to the 1950s, 1960s, show you paper over here that will talk about the danger behind assuming that a waterfall model is the right way to go. So it's been known for a long time that waterfall is a dangerous way of developing software. So we'll want to move towards iterative, agile, DevOps type of principle to develop software. Estimating costs, managing costs, I do want to get to those as we carry along. Let's talk about moving from project to program management. Again, I've mentioned that, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and I know that this will be an organizational disruption. I am talking to managers over here, so I will assume that you recognize that we will need to abandon our waterfall process. We'll need to move beyond that. We'll need to move towards continuous development, where now our developing a product becomes a process, not a project. All right, so we have on a yearly basis, we have a budget to continue the development of that product, not a project that we establish with, again, fixed scope and fixed timeline, that sort of thing. Scope and timeline, we'll come back to that since that doesn't change, but we'll need to move towards continuous development. Another thing as well that we'll need to change, this one is going to be highly disruptive for staff, and this is something we'll want to do over time, is integrate teams around product line. Instead of breaking the teams apart based on their discipline, DBAs versus network technician versus programmer versus testers versus whatever else, we'll want to start moving them towards one unified team organized around a product line. And I'll come back to that one in more detail. But again, abandoning the waterfall process, here's a couple of things that not just myself, but is well observed in the industry. And I think most of you can probably attest to that. The first thing is requirements are always wrong. Right? No matter how carefully you do your requirement, no matter how stringent and exhaustive your requirement process will be, it's going to be wrong. Why? It's not because we don't have good BAs. It's not because we don't have necessarily good process to gather requirement. But the reality is when it comes to gathering requirement, the only way to know if they are correct is to test them. And that's a big flaw when it comes to the waterfall. We gather a requirement very early on in the development process. We go through a series of steps, and towards the very end, we finally get to the test. We get to UAT, user acceptance test. And at this point, that's when we test the requirement. And that's when we know that the requirements were right or wrong. And most likely, I'm not saying all the requirements were wrong, but some of those requirements were wrong. They were untested. And I don't care if you tell me, well, JF, we're going to do mock-ups and we're going to do wireframe representation of the UI. We're going to get the client to walk through this with us and then accept the requirements. We don't know if they're correct because they haven't been tested. It might look good on paper, but we only know for sure that they're correct once we can test them. All right. So requirements are going to be always wrong in the waterfall process. Another big flaw of the waterfall process is estimates. All right. How often do we finish on time, on budget when it comes to the waterfall? And one of the reasons why it's very difficult to achieve is that with the waterfall, we're working with very broad estimate. The broader an estimate is in terms of cost or in terms of time, the further away it is in time, the more difficult it is to estimate correctly, simply due to the scope. For example, if I estimate that something is going to take 3 months, what's my range of error in there? The bigger the estimate, the bigger the range of error. The shorter the estimate, the narrower the estimate in terms of cost or duration, the narrower the chance of error. Another reality, change. Change happens. In my career, I've been developing software since at least 1993 professionally. I don't think I've ever worked on a development project, waterfall or agile, where from beginning to end, there were no changes. Change is a reality. We have to be ready to deal with it, all right? And one of the problems with the waterfall is that it does not deal with change gracefully. We're going to assume that our requirements are fixed and correct from the very get-go, and we walk down from our requirement, we build specification, we built a design, we built code, whatever else, and we're going to assume that they're correct. And if there's a change, and that's one of the big fallacy behind the waterfall process, is that the waterfall states that the further along you are in your project, the more expensive it is to make a change earlier on in your process. And unfortunately, with the waterfall, because we do the UAT at the very end over here, that's where we're going to realize, whoop, there's a couple of changes that will need to take place, which will make it very expensive because we have to go back and update the requirement. It's not optimal for modern software development. Testing is simply done too late. And finally, one of the things I've had the chance to observe directly in my career is that the waterfall artificially delays return on investment, where with iterative agile development, and even with the waterfall, one of the things I've observed, and that would surprise me, especially early on in my career, where I would develop a piece of software, and let's say a couple of months in, I would present my status to the client, so the client could review where we're at. Client looks at this and say, hey, I love it, JF. Can we start using it right away? And being a waterfall developer, that may be mightily uncomfortable because, yeah, I've got to that point over here, but there's still a lot of foundation missing, and there's still a lot of bugs missing over here. I was working on an arbitrary priority for my set of requirements. My client is excited, would like to use it right away, but unfortunately, well, it might be ready to be used as is, incomplete. If I can deliver what I have right now to the client and they can start using it right away, well, hey, I improve the ROI. They get better return on their investment. The longer I delay the deployment of the software, especially if I choose to wait until it's finished, whatever finished imply, I'm artificially delaying return on investment. So when it comes to moving to Agile, especially iterative type of development, we'll probably get to points here and there. Let's say we have 2 weeks iteration, 3 weeks iteration. We'll get to points where we have something that is deployable. And if it is deployable and the client is happy with it, better ROI for them. Right? They can start using the solution. It might be incomplete, it might still have some bugs, but at least they can start using the solution. And I've seen a lot more clients excited and happy about taking advantage of a product that deals with their own pain point than clients that I might spend a year developing a piece of software, presenting the software to them. They look at this and say, that's not what we asked for. Even though I met all the requirements to the letter, they'll say that's not what we asked for, or it doesn't work for us. And this is a reality to deal with. So let's maximize our ROI by using iterative, agile DevOps type of principle. Now, to move ahead, just a quick primer on Agile. For those of us that are new to the idea of Agile development, here I've copied the Agile Manifesto, which is available on agilemanifesto.org. You're welcome to review the document yourself. This is the original document that was published in 2001 describing the principles behind Agile development. So the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, we are uncovering better ways of developing software and by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and here's the heart of it. So as a manager, I would say start embodying those principles. They're really prioritizing on what really matters over here. So individuals and interaction over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Now, very important at the bottom, that is, while there is values to the items on the right, we find or we value the items on the left more. And this is important. As a manager over here, I want to make sure that we understand things like the second one, working software over comprehensive documentation. I will agree with that 100%. All right. The working software is the prime measure of progress. Working software is where we deliver business value. A software development process ain't about documentation. However, I'm not saying that documentation is useless. What I'm saying over here is if we are going to do documentation, let's make sure that we're doing it because it is helping us getting valuable working software out the door faster. Let's make sure we're not doing it because, hey, that's the way we've already done it, or because it seems like the right thing to do. That's where Cloud Maturity module comes into play. Let's measure what we do. We should be able to determine through our processes whether our delivery, our approaches, whatever processes and tool, as we've mentioned over here, our processes and tool deliver value to the product or no. Are they detrimental even? So when it comes to that, individuals and interaction over processes and tools. I love processes and I certainly use tools, but I never use them at the detriment of individuals and interaction. I use those tools and processes to maximize individuals and interaction. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Sure, contracts are useful, but at the end of the day, what will ensure repeat business, what will ensure customer satisfaction is where I work with the client as opposed to through a contract. Responding to change over following a plan. Those long-term glorious plans that we might spend weeks, months designing for a large software project are most likely going to go out the door the moment we get started. So it's okay to have plans. Nothing against that. Planning is essential. But the reality is things will change. Thus, our plan needs to be agile, needs to be ready to respond to changes. And we are undergoing a change right now. We are moving to the cloud. So based on the principles that we've talked about over here, to avoid another pain point, do not start your transition by flipping the maturity module that we've talked about, previously around. Don't start by thinking, hey, let's put a lot of maturity processes in place as to how we're going to migrate to the cloud and set up our processes and our technologies and make decisions before we tried anything. It's okay to start thinking about it, but let's test, especially early on in CMM1. Start exploring the technology, all right? Have small, low-risk projects. Start to embrace cloud technology and see how that works for you. And start building your processes, your compliance, your governance around what we're learning, not the other way around. All right, let's not try to define what our reality should be and try to fit reality to that. No, let's learn what the reality is, especially within the context of our organization, and then map our governance policies, whatever we want in terms of that reality. So being agile over here is, in my opinion, an almost essential, and I'll be honest with you, you want to succeed with the cloud, be agile. And if I can just wrap up that slide with one more point, you cannot do Agile. You can only be Agile. So it's a way of working. It's not a methodology that we're talking about over here. Don't go looking for how to do Agile. You cannot. You can only be Agile. Some methodologies will be Agile, methodologies like Scrum, but again, Agile ain't a methodology. You cannot say we do Agile. You can only say we are Agile. And I certainly hope that if you're not already Agile, we'll get Agile as we move ahead. So Agile and DevOps need to be managed. And this is another pain point that I encounter too often out there in the industry, where I have, especially programmers, and I don't want to necessarily sound like I'm attacking programmers. My background is programming myself, so I certainly understand the mindset. But when a programmer encounters the Agile Manifesto, they might see it as a true Boolean, yes or no, true or false type of situation, where they see working software instead of comprehensive documentation. And I might decide, oh, well, we don't need to write no stinking documentation. We don't need no tools and processes. We just have user interaction. No, that's not what we're saying. As I've emphasized previously, it's not a free-for-all. It needs to be managed. So as a manager, I have a very important role to play over here, right? It doesn't mean that I need to crack the whip and discipline my team, but I'll be honest with you, I find that managing iterative, agile, DevOps environment, the reality is it requires more discipline than managing a waterfall process. Why does it require more discipline? Well, one, the reality over here is waterfall. One of the things that's attractive, but again, not correct, is that it's easy. One little discipline at a time. All right, that's all we worry about. In the case of Agile, we do all of those disciplines concurrently. The requirements, the design, the specification, the analysis, of course, the code, the test, the deployment, all of that happens concurrently. So it requires strong leadership, strong team, good processes in place. Also, the processes needs to be business focused, not technology focused. And again, that's another place that requires strong discipline, strong leadership over here. Ideally, as a manager, you can straddle both sides of the fence, the business side and the technology side. But a good manager needs to first and foremost understand the business side of things. We are developing cloud-based solution and on-premise solution, not for the sake of databases and servers and whatever else. We're developing those solutions for the sake of the business, to support our business, our clientele, whatever the case might be, right? So that's something that if you come from a technology background, as I do myself, one of the biggest challenges that I had to deal with in my career is taking off my technologist hat, my programmer hat, and putting on a business hat. All right, look at it from a different perspective, not looking at it from the perspective of databases and servers and architecture and whatever else. Let's look at it from the perspective of the business. So very important suggestion for you. And finally, I do want to emphasize that cost and deadlines are still a reality. All right, that's another misconception that I encounter within team, where because we're agile, because we're iterative, we do things ad hoc from iteration to iteration. If that's the mentality, unfortunately, it's wrong. Deadlines are still a thing. We still need to ensure that we can get such and such deliverable, such and such feature, whatever the case might be, out the door by a given date. Budgets are still a reality, and they need to be managed in the cloud. The way we're going to manage our budget will change. We'll talk about that very soon. But those things need to be managed, and they need to be managed with discipline, not ad hoc. And that discipline needs to be applied, if necessary, daily, weekly, monthly, all right, as opposed to necessarily yearly, as we might do with traditional project-based approach for our development endeavor. So estimating costs, here's a nice solution to one of our points over here. how do I know how much this is going to cost me? All right, how much my cloud solution is going to cost me? Well, at this point, you'll want to use the Azure pricing simulator or calculator. Let me crack that open for you guys right now so you can see this in action. Here's the pricing calculator for us. It's a website that you can go through over here. I'll put it in the chat window for those of you who are interested in checking this out. All right, so here's the pricing calculator in Azure. The idea is here's a list of all the products that are available for us in Azure. And beside that, here's a list of the categories. And beside that, the products that are available for us in Azure. So one of the premise over here is we want to be able to use the pricing calculator to calculate how much our infrastructure is going to cost us. So if I need, say, a database, we're modernizing our approach, we want to move to CosmoDB. I can add a CosmoDB instance. If you're not familiar with CosmoDB, don't sweat it too much, but I can add a CosmoDB instance over here, choose the parameter, and this is going to give me a cost estimate, either in US dollar or maybe Canadian dollar or whatever fund you might be using at your end. And you can continue to add as many resources as you'd like over here, your virtual machine, your app services, Azure function. And again, they're broken down by category, web type of service, love my container type of service, Kubernetes, that sort of thing. Wish I could spend time on that, of course, dealing with security. So I can use that over here to create fairly accurate estimate of how much this is going to cost me, how much those resources are going to cost me. When it comes to managing and optimizing our costs, we have the Azure Billing Center that's available for us, where we can see detailed breakdown of where our money is going on a day-by-day basis. We can also get fairly detailed forecasts of where our money is going in Azure. That's something I would recommend that we explore. Unfortunately, I don't really have the time to fully go into that, but we also have tags and policies that I'd like you to be aware of in Azure. Talk to Azure Architect. They can start setting that up for you. Another thing that we can optimize is if you have existing licenses to software. Microsoft servers, let's say a Microsoft Server 2016, 2019, I've got licenses to Oracle, I've got licenses for whatever. There's the concept of BYOL, bring your own license. So if I already have on-premise license, in many cases, I can transfer them to the cloud. Another great thing that we can do is get into reserved usage. This can give you generally about a 30% saving on many resources, especially compute resources over here, where you would pay a flat fee indicating, hey, I want to use that compute resource and pay for it ahead of time. And you can gain 10 to 30, maybe even 40% saving, depending on the resource, for that resource itself. So that's something else to look at over here. If you have a Microsoft Enterprise Licensing Agreement, that's something to review. There's probably reserved usage in here for some of your compute resource. Let's take advantage of those. Now, moving ahead, let's talk about challenges with our staff. And I'll start winding things down for this session. Again, I want to respect your lunch hour. Reluctance to change. That is one of the things that I find, especially in larger, well-established organizations, that can be some of the most challenging aspect of moving to the cloud. They don't want to change. And it's not necessarily the technology that bothers the organization, the teams, but it's the fact that the very structure of the team needs to change. There's also, of course, of the fear of the unknown. We are taking technology that we are very familiar with, that we've been running on-premise for years, decades, whatever the case might be, and now we're going to throw that out there in the cloud on unknown infrastructure with unknown capability. So we do need to recognize that this can be mightily uncomfortable for a technology practitioner. Also, breaking down the silos, as I hinted at previously, breaking down the organization. Instead of organizing the teams based on their skill set, let's organize the team based on their based on the product lines themselves. And I'll get to that very soon. But the breaking of those silos from experience can be mightily uncomfortable and disruptive. It's something that will take time. And if I can just emphasize that point quickly for you, it will take time. Give it time. Don't rush through it. Migrating to the cloud is not like flicking a light switch and boom, you're done. No, it's something. It's a transition. It's a migration. Do it piecemeal at a time, step at a time. I'm not saying artificially slow things down. You want to move fairly quickly. You want to move with a bit of a sense of urgency. But the idea over here is let's not do a big bang transition over here. Gradually, piece at a time. Test, 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 test. See what works, right? And do the same when it comes to breaking down your silos, rebuilding your team. It will take time. It will take strong leadership to do that. So reorganization of our team, here's what we're getting at over here. We want to move our teams to be cross-functional. Teams are now organized around a product line instead of a function, right? Where again, instead of having all the DBAs lumped together, all the system administrator lumped together, all the network technician lumped together, now we're going to push them by product line. So I've got 3 product lines over here, A, B, and C. Those product lines are composed of 1 or more products, and those products are developed and operated by a single team, a dedicated team. And again, that's going to be a big change over here, where programmers and a network technician and operators and systems administrator and whatever the case might be are now going to work together to develop and maintain that product. We're getting into the idea of dev and DevOps over here. If I can summarize what DevOps is, the idea behind DevOps is fundamentally we want to unify our development, testing, and operational endeavor into one unified process, as opposed to having different processes that are managed by their own silos, managed by their own fiat. Now, what we want to do is we want to move them into a single unified process that is developed, maintained by the team, and is done in a disciplined fashion. Again, I'm not saying that it has to be heavily bureaucratic. Keep the bureaucracy as low as possible, but discipline needs to be there. There may be shared resources between the team. Things like BAs. BAs may not be required. Business analysts may not be required 100% of their time with one team, so they might share their time across different teams. Same thing maybe with database administrator or maybe even programmers, but they are going to be, they may be shared across products, maybe even across product line, but they're not on-demand resources. What I mean by that over here is don't go back to the idea of a silos. You might say, oh, well, because we don't need a BA 100% of the time, let's create a BA team and they can rent those resources as necessary. No, we're back to creating silos. We just relabeled silos to something else. A BA or a network administrator or a programmer or a tester or whatever else belongs to a product line and ideally belongs to a specific product. So moving ahead, training is going to be essential. Right now you might say, well, JF, of course you're going to say training is essential. That's what we do at WebAge. But don't take my word for it. Do your research. All right? I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to sell you training. I mean, yeah, part of it is due to that. But more importantly, there is tremendous value behind training. I cannot emphasize this enough. There's many ways by which we can address pain point, but training, getting ready to address those as a team will be essential. Especially since, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm overemphasizing things over here or artificially emphasizing things, but it's important to recognize that the skill set that we have for our on-premise stuff does not transfer one-to-one to cloud. We need to relearn how we're going to do things. And that applies at any level: management, programming, testing, operation, whatever else, security. These are skills that needs to be transferred to the cloud. So if you decide, hey, I don't want to invest in training, that's okay. But make sure you invest the time in allowing your team to formally familiarize themselves with the cloud. And by formally, what I mean is at a minimum, go through documentation. Don't just read a couple of how-tos over here. Don't just look at how can I transfer my one application to the cloud, but take the time to formally familiarize yourself with the cloud. An example of that, I've used Cosmo DB as an example. What the heck is Cosmo DB? At this point, there's one of two things that can happen. Some teams might decide, I've never heard of Cosmo DB, but I know about SQL Server. So I'm going to use SQL database because that's what I know. And that might be okay. But it does mean that you're missing out on 4 or 5 different scheduled, 4 or 5 different database types that we can use with Cosmo DB. So very important over here. When we migrate to the cloud, it's not just a question of learning how to transition application A to the cloud. That's easy, but we're not cloud enabling the application. So recognize that we need to relearn our capability. Also very important, and as a manager, I need to be cognizant of that. Default to what staff already knows and is comfortable with. This is another challenge for us over here. Let's say as a system administrator, I'm very comfortable with managing virtual server. So my first knee-jerk reaction, and I'm not blaming anybody for that, is when we move to the cloud, well, let's start managing virtual machines in the cloud instead of on-premise. But now we're falling into the IaaS trap. I'm still taking on most of the responsibility, most of the risk, most of the cost at my end. I'm not taking advantage of what the cloud has to offer. And staff does not know what Azure can do. If I may go back to our view over here, when it comes to all those resources that we have over here, all right, we're not limiting ourselves to VMs that we need to configure and manage ourselves. These are machines, these are resources that we can use that have simply no equivalent on-prem. So take the time and help your team familiarize themselves with what's available on the cloud. So let's wrap things up with this last slide over here. Here's a bit of a cheat sheet to get you started with training. It is going to be essential. The first one that I'd like to share with you over here is the Microsoft Azure for Manager course. That's actually a fairly new course at WebAge that we offer over here. We've had a chance to talk about some of the challenges and pain points when it comes to moving to Azure and moving to the cloud in general. Here's a one-day course that deals with those and an understanding of Azure in more detail for us. The next one is the foundation course, the AZ 900 for your staff. And I would recommend, I'm not trying to sell you anything over here. You could say indirectly yes, but it's a good one that I would recommend your staff takes because it provides the foundation, an understanding of what Azure is, what the cloud is, what are some of the broad resources we can use with the cloud, getting into governance, getting into pricing, that sort of thing. Then depending on what the skill set is that we want to build, we've got systems administrator courses. You'll notice that there's 2 mentioned over here, the AZ-103 and the AZ-104. AZ-104 is in beta presently. That course and that certification will come out later this year in April or May, I forget exactly when. Same thing with the developer. If you're a programmer or you have programmers on your team, the AZ-103 or AZ-104. Architect. this is a good course, but don't send a neophyte to this one, all right? Architecting for Azure, the Azure Architect over here is not one, but 2 courses. And those courses are fairly intensive. I've delivered them a couple of times, and I don't think I've ever had somebody walk out of this course and say, oh, that was a nice light course. Most of the time, I'll get comments saying, whoa, that was a lot. So it is a fairly intensive course. It's a sought-after course, a sought-after skill set when it comes to Azure. It's 2 courses. You want to certify yourself in that. It's also 2 exams. We can get into Azure DevOps, the AZ500. And there's also courses on security. And I did not include things like AI courses, database management courses, which are also available. You'll find them online. There's the site webasesolutions.com/courses, Microsoft-Azure-training. Go to that site. You will find those courses available for you, plus more. If you're not sure what courses might best suit your team, at this point, I'm going to recommend give us a call, send us an email, contact us, and we'll be more than happy to work with you to help determine what course best suits our need, best suits your need when it comes to that. These are courses that myself and the senior staff at WebAge has delivered. We understand them. We've been working with the Fortune 500. We've been working with the federal, local, provincial, or state, as well as municipal government delivering those courses. We've been working with the private sector delivering those courses, financial, telecom, military. So we have a very broad set of experience when it comes to delivering those courses. So to wind things down and to give you the rest of your lunch over here, I'm going to wrap up this seminar with that. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join me during your busy lunch hour. I do greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat window or in the QA window, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And judging how there's no questions just yet, what I'll do is I'll formally wrap up this session. I'll stay online for those of you who have questions, but at this point, I'll formally wrap up this session. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. Hope that this exploration of pain point and their solution was valuable for you. And more importantly, hoping to meet some of you face to face as you progress towards your cloud migration. Hope you have a great afternoon and, of course, a fantastic weekend.